My name is 𝗍𝗳𝗱𝗏. I'm the president of the Elgin Historical Society, and I would like to welcome everybody here to the, what's now the 14th, I believe, Vimy Ridge Talk. And it's great to be in partnership with the museum to bring this to you. Before we get going with our speaker, I would like to invite you to first, our next meeting won't be on the second Wednesday. We're going to change it up for the 𝗂𝗏𝗁𝗁 Toast. It'll be on the 3rd, or the 20th, the 20th of May at 𝗓𝗏𝗁𝗁, at St. Peter's Cemetery at 𝗓𝗏𝗁𝗁. We'll be toasting Colonel Talbot's grave. For those of you who are new around here, this is one of our annual traditions. We go out to Colonel Talbot's grave in the graveyard, toast the grave, and this year's toaster will be local historian and home restorer Lawrence Grant. So, and after the toast, we will retire to the Bacchus Page House for a short program, which has yet to be determined, but I'm sure it'll be great. After that, it is our Strawberry Social. We'll be back to the second Wednesday, June 10th, and we believe we're going to be at the 𝗓𝗍𝗃. We're going to go out into the county to the 𝗓𝗍𝗃 Dairy Museum out in Jamestown Road, south of Aylmer, and all the details haven't been finalized, but that'll be 7 p.m. June 10th. We'll have more details for you at the 𝗂𝗏𝗁𝗁 Toast, or as always, check the website for our latest events. So we'll get on to our speaker right away, and I'm going to ask Maddie to come up and give the introduction.
Hello everybody, my name is Maddie. I'm the curator here at the Elgin County Museum, for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet. So first off, I would like to say thank you all so much for coming out for our 14th Annual Vimy Lecture. It's so special for us to be able to host these lectures for 14 years in a row, and for all of you to be able to come out and celebrate and commemorate the Battle of Vimy Ridge with us. So today we're very excited to have our guest speaker, Eric Edwards. So in 2009, Eric's journey of discovery about the men who served in the 18th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Force began. His connection to this battalion was his paternal grandfather, William Billy Dewar, who had the distinction of being the first soldier of the 18th Battalion to be wounded in action. Since then, he has documented and researched the lives of the men of the 18th Battalion, and has found the process of documenting the lives of the members of this unit a gateway to discovering a wide range of social history about people's lives in Canada's past. This passion is expressed through his blog and Facebook group about the 18th Battalion. So please join me in welcoming Eric Edwards.
Thank you, Maddie. So just before I get started, I want to thank you all for coming. Also, I want to take a moment to recognize the military heritage from St. Thomas and the 91st Battalion. Those soldiers fought with the 18th Battalion, so I've read their names, I've read their stories, I've written their stories about them in some cases. So it comes it's very appropriate that I have an opportunity to share with some of my knowledge and interest in the 18th Battalion, particularly with Vimy Ridge. I had the opportunity to go to Vimy Ridge in 2017, not obviously during the night, but in August. The biggest mistake I made was I didn't really plan very well. And it was a little bit like going to Disney World, all these sights and sounds, and having a familiarity, but not really having a grounding in the geography and the place and the time. So it was not wasted, but it's a good excuse for me to think about going back in the future, which I think I will. The objective of the presentation is it's going to be a little bit technical and tactical, and what I want to do was focus on the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade. I have some slides that will give you some background and get you grounded a little bit about how an army is created and what the different units are. And then I'm hoping through this presentation to give you a greater insight of how the men fought at Vimy Ridge, and particularly those that you know that were from this area that served at Vimy, and particularly the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So I do have a scripting. I will be referring to it. I may go off script a little bit and extemporize. We'll see how that works. So I appreciate your forbearance, and we will begin. So on April 9th, 2017, 25,000 Canadians gathered in France to pay homage to Canada's one of Canada's moments in history. For some, the Battle of Vimy Ridge was a nation-building focal point. For others, it was an example of the Canadian Corps becoming the tip of the spear of the British Imperial Army. the can-do force that was sent to trouble spots to solve tricky tactical problems. In this presentation, I will focus on the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade, and I'll probably use 4th CIB, just because it's less words, as its operations and success is representative of the preparations and outcome for the entire Canadian Corps. And using original source material, we'll explore some of the components that made this action a success. So one of my favorite photographs. These are Canadian troops that I believe are have served at the battle and are going to the rear area. So this is a typical landscape. This is a photograph from Vimy during sometime between the 9th and the 12th. If you can take a moment to imagine the sights and the sounds, it's kind of interesting as a document because if we take a look here, where the laser pointer is, that is what's called a Lewis gunner. This is probably his section of men that are supporting the Lewis gun. It looks like he's wearing pannies of the drums of ammunition. And in the back, the detail's a little hard to see. You can see someone is dressed a little differently. He's an officer. So the reason I brought this in the forefront is some of you may recognize some of these men. These are people that are from St. Thomas, and they served at Vimy. And some of those men might be in that photograph. So to me, it makes an immediate connection between a photograph from 2017 and this photograph that was taken sometime in the past, in 1967. So these men had stories to tell, and hopefully some of them they did share with us, but with distance and time, it's difficult for us to understand the environment in which they were fighting. And I'm hoping that I can give you a little bit more insight into that. So I'm a big geography guy. So I don't know how many of you have been to Vimy Ridge, but this photograph is an aspect that's basically looking from the northeast to the northwest, and in the distance, you see this little rise of land there. That's a coal tip. So this was one of the major coal-producing areas in France. Oh, can they not hear me very well from that?
I was wondering if we could test this.
Sure.
With everyone.
Okay.
It's lovely.
No. That's okay. Is that, you guys can hear me better in the background? Okay, awesome. So this is the top of the ridge. So the steep part of the ridge is actually this section down here. So the Canadian troops are approaching from this direction and going up. This is just another picture from the opposite way. So this is now looking from the southeast towards the northwest. And you can see evidence of the shelling that is still present there. And in different aspects of this photograph, you can actually see the trench lines as an example. So during the presentation, we'll take a quick overview of the structure of what an army is as it pertains to its place a battalion holds within the military hierarchy and also of their brigade. The geography of the ground over which this battle occurred is important, and a review of this geography is done to give you some sense of how difficult this was as a tactical problem. The immediate response to the Battle of Canada also shows the influence of our place in the British Empire in regard to our identification within the larger context of the British Empire at that time. I was actually really surprised that the focus of a newspaper, I didn't expect the outcome that I saw. And also too, this tactical analysis will help us understand not only the reasons for our success at Vimy, but also give us some insight into the soldier on the ground. So a structure of an army. This is actually the 18th Battalion at the Wolseley Barracks during the winter of 1914-1915. It's kind of cute. If you look over to the left side, there's a boy standing in the snow with them. So I think that's kind of interesting. So an army basically is a number of what we call corps. And then the Corps is a number of divisions, and the CF had 4 divisions in the Canadian Corps. A division is made up of what are called 4 brigades, and there are 4 battalions in a Canadian brigade. So inside a corps, a division and brigade, there were specialist troops, like the railway troops, forestry troops, engineers, people that would help support the logistics and preparation. The railway troops were very important. You had to get all the equipment up to the front, as an example, and also return equipment and the wounded, as an example, too. So without those people, we couldn't be able to fight effectively. So inside the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade, there was the 18th Battalion, which was formed mostly out of southwestern Ontario and up to Owen Sound, the 19th Battalion, 20th Battalion, and the 21st Battalion. There's also the 4th Trench Mortar Battery and the 4th Machine Gun Company. So those were the units that made up the 4th CIA. And we'll talk about that in a little bit better detail in the coming up. So, one of the things I find interesting is I'm doing a lot of research with newspapers and letters that are being written and then they're being published in the local newspapers. And there's a certain immediacy. And you can see in this quote, when it stands on its own, you don't really understand what it means. But if we take this quote from this officer in a larger context, he's actually saying that if I die, you'll find out about it before you get this letter. And sadly, he was killed in action on April 9th. So the Walden area, which I'll read out, is, he says, this is something worthwhile and worthy of our greatest effort, for it will surely have a bearing on the outcome, and our country is at stake. So there seems to be an inherent understanding that this is a significant historical event as far as the Canadian identity is concerned. And we do need to remember that the first contingent was only actually about 50% of the people were born in Canada. They were mostly British born or from the United Kingdom. So our identity as a country was kind of different than it is now. So his parents received, I don't know when they received that letter, but he wrote it the day before the battle, as you can see. So it was definitely on his mind. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with this document. It's called the Circumstances of Death card. They exist for almost every soldier up until the surname starting with S. They don't exist. In this case, this gives a specific instance of how this soldier lost his life. A lot of them just simply say killed in action. There is no evidence. There is no witness to their death and their sacrifice. In this case, we know that someone indicated that he was killed by a German machine. So we're talking about units, but these units are made up of people, and those people suffer and sacrifice. So one of the things I thought was really interesting is Vimy was a part of the Battle of the Rats, a larger battle involving the British, Australian, and New Zealand, and I believe South African units. There were 14 divisions with 9 in reserve, with a total of 150,000 casualties, in which about 3,600 were KIA with Canadian forces and 7,000 wounded in action. But if you were to go and pick up the newspaper on Windsor on April 10th, 1917, you would have seen this headline. The British drive is in full swing. The focus is on the Imperial. The focus is on the mother country. The focus is not on the Canadians. That's the largest headline. And that probably would be representative of almost every paper in Canada. The Canadians, us, we get that. So it's a column, and there's more information, but I just wanted to focus it was a secondary headline. It's good news. 2,000 German prisoners have been taken. But it gives you an idea about the focus of the culture at that time. Was we were in part of the Commonwealth. We were basically part of an imperial system, and there was a dominance of British culture, and it was represented by the writings of the newspaper. What is interesting to me is, as part of the research for this presentation, I went through this newspaper for 2 weeks, and then went for 3 weeks and 4 weeks. There was not a single letter published about the battle, and I don't know why that would have been. If it was so important, I thought there would at least be letters being published. The average turnaround time of letters was anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, so Maybe if I dug a little bit further, I would have noticed something, but there wasn't any letters that I could find in the Windsor newspaper about the battle from the soldiers. But what's interesting is in the same newspaper, the very next day, you can see in the yellow highlight, they literally say that Vimy has a sentimental value that can hardly be reckoned. Now, how did they know that? How did that sort of collective understanding that this battle was going to be so important to Canada and to our conception of ourselves as a country and as a military power? But they basically wrote, and I don't know who the author is, that person basically stated something, an ethos that we are expressing today by examining this battle and honoring it. If you're not familiar with this is a picture of the veterans at the commemoration in 1936 of the Vimy Memorial. That is a headband, or sorry, an armband that would have been worn by someone who was a member of the 20th Battalion. And they all had berets that they would wear. And there was over 6,000 veterans that went to that commemoration. Which is pretty impressive. And there's an overhead aerial shot on that day. And there was 25,000 Canadians went on the 100th anniversary. So we think it's pretty important. So, I like to take the opportunity to use a little bit of geography that we're familiar with and place Vimy in so that you will know where it is. Like when you say the word Vimy, I don't know if people have a conception of where it is in the continent of Europe or in France at all. So using the representation of Southeast England, which I think most of us are familiar with, Vimy is located right around there, where that red symbol is. So there was a line of trenches extending from basically the Belgian border all the way down to the Swiss border. And this is a representation. That red line is roughly the trenches in April 1917, extending all the way from the Channel to Switzerland. One continuous line of trenches occupied by the Germans, the French, the Canadians, the Imperial forces, and the Belgians. And Vimy is this area inset here in the blue that you see with the lines. And we can see the town of Vimy, Arras, and that is basically the area of operations by which we are interested in today. So I wanted to also take the opportunity is the 4th CIB came over to France and Belgium in September 1915, and they were positioned outside of Ypres to the west of Ypres. And then later on, where that lower arrow is, was their involvement in the Battle of the Somme. So in September 1915, they came over to the continent. They went into the trenches. They didn't really experience any significant combat until the Battle of 𝗖𝗱𝗄 in the spring of 1916, and then they were transferred to the Somme and were involved in the Battle of 𝗂𝗏𝗄 on September 15, 1916. This is a significant historical battle because it was the introduction of tanks. And the 18th Battalion specifically was assigned 2 of these new innovative weapons. Though sadly, the War Diary makes no mention of the involvement of the tanks at all. So this is a map that gives you a bit of an idea of the entire battle area of the Battle of Arras. And then you can see the Canadians are located. There's the 4th Division, there's the 1st Division, the 3rd Division, and the 2nd Division. And the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade was a member of the 2nd Division. So it's on the south side, it's not on the very south end, it's the next one to the north. So the next map I showed to one of my co-workers, He was a sergeant in the Royal Canadian Regiment, 3rd Battalion, with 2 tours in Afghanistan. And when they showed him this map, he said he wouldn't want to fight there. He said that high ground is a barrier to success. And there would have to be a lot of preparation and a lot of planning to be able to overcome this geography. So here's a soldier who fought in Afghanistan in 2005 that says he wouldn't want to fight in this space with all the training experience that he has. That black line represents the top of the ridge. So if you look at it, you look out to this area here, this is, you can look out over this view. It's like being at the top of the escarpment in Hamilton and looking out over the city of Hamilton. And this is the town of Lens. And this area here that you see the little dots in here are coal tips. So high pyramid-shaped looking piles of coal stuff. The Canadian troops are located right around here, with the German trenches being right around there. And I'll have a closer view of that shortly. So there's the town of Rass at the summit and Lens at the top. Lens was important because of the coal, but also too it was a communication hub, and so it was a Rass. You can also see that the Germans had a dominant view of the area off to the southwest, and the Canadians had to adapt and create basically tunnels to be able to bring up their equipment and men under cover so that the Germans weren't aware of their preparations. And those 2 other arrows are the areas that we're going to be particularly interested in. So this map is a closer view of that area. And just to give you a point of reference, this is where the red dot, that's where the monument is, to give you an idea of the geography. So the shape of the land had an incredible influence on how this was going to be overcome as a tactical problem for the Canadians. And there's just a reference towards the south end. The German lines basically extend along this highway. So this is a modern map, this is a limited access highway. And so even the geography influences the building of the highway. And so even after the war, that had an influence on the outcome. This is a contemporary map from 1936 in a guide or a booklet that was given out for the commemoration. And it's a pretty good detail of the breakup of how each of the divisions were organized and each of the battalions. So if we look down to the south, we have the 1st Canadian Division here, and then we have, sorry, the 1st, then the 2nd, and then the 3rd and the 4th. Those colors are rectangles, actually represent the symbols of each of the battalions, or sorry, the divisions. So each soldier would have a patch on their shoulder that would denote what division they were in, so they could tell what division they belonged to. The green bars are rough representations of the area of operations for the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade. And you'll see this green rectangle here, which represents the position of the brigade and its objective, which was the black line. And then the 21st Battalion, which is a member brigade, was going to take the red line, but then the 6th Brigade was going to pass through them from the left to the right and take the black and possibly the brown objectives. So they had a specific area of responsibility. It was important that they didn't go outside of their boundaries because they wanted to maintain the concentration of the troops so that they would have an effective force to fight and defeat the Germans. So the red line is showing again just where the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade, its objectives were. And then it was going to be taken over by the 6th Brigade was going to pass through them and take the next set of objectives. And that was the same with each of the other divisions and brigades. So it was almost like a choreography. So this is a closer view of the area specifically, and I'm outlining 𝗂𝗏𝗃𝗃. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, there was a group of craters that had been created primarily by the Germans, is my understanding. And what the objective was is they would blow mines underneath the front lines and disrupt the lines and then try to take that area over. It became the headquarters for the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade and also the 18th Battalion, and it is now actually a grave site. And so there are soldiers from the 18th Battalion buried there. Basically, the area of interest for us is that along this road along here. So this is almost like the center of the area, and they're going to be a line along here from the left to the right. So the crater exists today as a burial ground, as I mentioned. There are 53 burials represented by this cemetery. 48 are Canadian and identified, and 2 are soldiers that are Canadian soldiers that are unknown, with two additional identified soldiers from different units or nations that are their nationality and their identity are unknown. So this is a modern day satellite view. The area is it's agricultural, it's beautiful. You know, it's built up with a combination of sort of rural density with small businesses and very small sort of industrial businesses like, you know, automotive repair shops and things like that. And it is it's quite beautiful. And when you're there, you just can't imagine what it looked like during the battle. You have no conception. It's effectively recovered. But if you do have an opportunity, and those that have, you know that there's areas around the memorial that are restricted. You cannot go there because there are unexploded ordnance, and there have been Canadians that have been killed doing research in the tunnels, trying to discover things about our military heritage there. There are fields that are marked that do not enter, but there are sheep that are grazing on those. So I don't know if that's a plan to get dinner early or something. The stars, the one on the left is highlighting where 𝗂𝗏𝗃𝗃 is actually located, and then the star over to the right side is 𝗵𝗃, or at least I pronounce it as 𝗵𝗃, which was the farthest extent of the objectives for the Canadian Corps, and specifically the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade on April 9th. And this is a very interesting overlay. So this is actually how it would look. I don't have the exact date of the map, but the location is very close. The blue line, if you can see very light blue line, is the front line of the British or Canadian soldiers. The red lines that look like varicose veins are trenches. Each of those blocks are dugouts, representing a place that the German soldiers would basically occupy when they weren't on duty and be prepared to respond to an attack. Obviously, there's frontline trenches and then the secondary line of trenches, and which are very important, and they were major objectives. So there's a frontline trench, there's the second line trench. This trench here is a communication trench, and the soldiers would have been trained specifically to understand the trenches and how they were outlined. In fact, they had tape courses where they would actually build, in effect, a diorama of the German trench system, and they would actually have the German trench names and understand how the trenches were designed so that they wouldn't get lost. And to give you an idea of how complex that is, those are all the trench names. Some of them are German and some of them are not. They're in English. But they actually would have maps, and they would use all the German trench names. And they would be familiar with what the trench names were so that they would not get lost, hopefully, which is hard to believe because I couldn't handle that. I can barely handle a street map. So you can see that just even the aspect of trying to you know, a significant portion of the preparations was aerial reconnaissance. So those aircraft would fly over, they would take pictures, then they would have to use local trench raids and other types of information gathering to collect the names and the positions and the strength of each of the positions in the German line. They would have to try to identify strong points, machine gun nests, the dugouts, as you can see, they had a very clear idea where the Germans were. And it would be important to know where they are, because if they were suppressing the Germans from getting out of the dugouts, they would want to go to those dugouts and obviously deal with the Germans when they were trapped inside those positions. It's a dirty business. So that's the outcome of shelling at 𝗏𝗏. It's not a single building standing. The trees are completely denuded of branches. Any human habitation, if there were basements, would be below ground. And you can actually see there's a bunch of soldiers standing there. It's extremely desolate, and it's completely different from that picture from the satellite that's so green and verdant compared to what it was like in April 1917. And certainly you've heard that there's the iron feet, you know, that they still find ordnance, you know, when they're walking along the roads and things like that, grenades and other things like that. So the war hasn't completely ended for the residents that live in the area where the front lines were located. So though we're talking and focusing about an infantry brigade, the infantry wouldn't like to admit it, but if they didn't have artillery, they wouldn't have succeeded in this battle. And I've read a number of papers about the Canadian efforts from the artillery side to use sound ranging and other technologies to identify German guns and to destroy them. They did a good job. It was estimated that 85% of all the German artillery had been suppressed by the time of the attack. And that was very important because the Germans could counter by dropping artillery fire on the advancing soldiers and help hold up the advance. So this diagram on the right side shows you in very basic terms that they would fire the artillery and drop it on the first line, and the soldiers were expected to be typically within 150 yards of the artillery fire of their own guns. So if a shell fell short, they would be killed by their own artillery. So it took a lot of nerve and a lot of training, and they were not encouraged, they were ordered to maintain a tight connection with the barrage as it rolled forward. They would, the barrage would last for 3 minutes in the case of the Vimy Ridge, and they would move on to the next lift. So typically it would be the next line of resistance, and then it would lift again and lift again. And the map on the left-hand side here is the barrage map for the entire sector for the Canadian Corps. And it's an impressive piece of documentation. I don't know if anybody does graphic design, but they didn't have software to do this. They did this analog. It was very, very challenging to do, and yet it's a beautiful map in its construction. So if you take a look at that map, these parallel lines that are blue or black, that are proceeding from the south to the north, is the barrage. And basically the barrage follows the German lines and trenches. And I will show you in a little bit more detail what I mean about that. So this is a close-up of the barrage map in the area that is of interest to us in this presentation. You can see that this is 𝗂𝗎𝗓. Sorry, I'm trying to reach and I'm too short for this job. 𝗂𝗎𝗓 is roughly around here. And that is the first barrage lift from 0 hour to 3 minutes after. That's it. If you're not in the trench within the first, or shortly after that barrage lifts, the Germans are going to be coming out of that trench armed, and obviously they're going to resist with the intent of killing you. They're not going to be trying to take prisoners. And after 3 minutes, it goes to the next line, and it's from 3 minutes after 0 hour to 8 minutes after 0 hour, and so on. So if you don't keep up with the barrage, you're going to suffer the consequences if you don't stay tight to that barrage. It also gives us an indication of the frantic pace that these men were involved in. They had 3 minutes to take the first line, and then they had to move on. So there was no rest for them until, after they had consolidated the position and reinforced themselves. So the sharp end, the artillery needs to prepare the battle space for the sharp end or for the infantry, and the infantry has to respond. So this next scene is actually a silent film. There were two cameras at the Battle of Somme on July 1st. And this is called the Sunken Lane. And I don't know if you're not familiar with it. It's relatively famous. If you ever get a chance to see Peter Jackson's film, I just forgot the title of Peter Jackson's film. They Shall Not Grow Old. He took a lot of old, terrible condition film and he made it 4K quality. These films did not have any audio, so he got specialists in lip reading, and they actually were able to fill in an estimation of how these people and what they were talking about. And some of them were talking about, I need some more cigarettes, and other people were talking about other things that were a little bit more pressing with fighting the war. So as we watch the film, the camera's looking down at these soldiers. The man's cleaning the Stokes mortar. Some of their behavior may be kind of mimicking for the camera because this would have been a new experience. Some of these soldiers are acting out of nervousness. Some of these soldiers have never fought in a battle before. And then the camera changes orientation. You can see that man there. We've seen him before. And there's a mortar crew in the front, having a cigarette. Every while I imagine I would start smoking again if I was fighting the war. And then that young man there at the left-hand side, to me, he looks like he's absolutely scared to death, which I wouldn't blame him to be. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Battle of the Somme, it was not a very good experience for the British and other Allied forces that were involved in it, and it was not a good experience for the Canadians either. We learned a lot of hard lessons from that battle, which we didn't want to replicate. And I think 𝗏𝗵 is a good example that we took those lessons and we were able to apply a better solution than what occurred to these poor men. So the war diary for the 1st Battalion, Lancashire Fusiliers, says there were 7 officers killed, 14 wounded, 500 ranks, other ranks, wounded or killed. Battalion is roughly 600 to 1,000 men, so they lost half their soldiers in the battle. Okay. There was a fairly large political outcry from the impact of this battle, and I think there's, in my reading, there's evidence that the Canadians did not want to have to suffer this ever again. They wanted a better solution, and the British did too, and they helped build a solution. So this is a quote: "The attack cost the battalion dearly. It replicates that there were 7 officers killed and 14 wounded, 156 other ranks killed, 290 wounded with 11 missing, presumed dead." So not as bad as the Newfoundland Regiment at 𝗏𝗏, but pretty bad. And what's kind of interesting is when I went to the War Diary of the 18th Battalion for September 1916, there was someone had literally written this in the diary saying, "Not much help to a historian." If you were to take a chance to read that diary and compare it to the other battalions, it's almost like there was almost like a tacit agreement that they weren't going to tell the whole story. The war diary for that month, September 15, 1916, is bereft of information. There's no information to be had. The one book that was written about the Canadian involvement in the Somme there's basically one quote about the 8th Battalion because there is nothing about it. On the 15th of September, the battalion suffered 150 casualties out of 600 soldiers. So the Sunken Lane to me is representative and emblematic of the challenges of the human cost. It's also too a metric of what are we trying to do? We're trying to win a war. We want good morale, but we also can't waste these people. And I hate to use the word waste, but they did treat soldiers like they were inventory. They were things to be used for government purposes. These are the emblems on the shoulder patches of the members of the 4th CIB. The 18th Battalion is on the left. The 19th is on is to the right. The 20th, and then the 21st Battalion. So it was an easy way, using symbology, to be able to identify if you were in the same unit and you weren't lost, as an example. And that is a period correct flag. That's a little inside joke for me. So, I've been talking about the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade, I've been talking about battalions. So, a structure of a battalion. So the men of the 91st Battalion, if it had been able to come to full strength, would have had approximately 1,150 officers and men. They would have been broken down into specialties: pioneers, signalers, stretcher bearers, attached, not quite sure what that means, machine gun section, company, and then a base company, which is sort of like an administrative role. When the 2nd Contingent and 4th Infantry Brigade went over, there were snipers, there were bombers, they created an idea of specialties because they realized they needed to specialize certain roles and focuses for the soldiers. But by 1917, the battalions were similar in size, but they had sort of gotten rid of the idea of pioneers. They would do that type of work, but it would be left to the ancillary units to support them that way. The one thing that they did is they innovated by adding a piece of equipment called a Lewis machine gun. And there will be a picture to show you shortly what it looks like. There were 4 companies and 6 officers, 220 men per company, made of what was called 4 platoons, which is roughly 32 men, 36. And then they would have specialties. There'd be riflemen, rifle grenade specialists, grenade sections, and then they would have 1 Lewis gun per platoon. This is a pretty significant innovation. The Germans had a culture, I call it the culture of the machine gun. They understood its importance in the defensive, and they were very good at positioning their weapons and utilizing them to great effect, sadly, for a lot of people. It was such an important role that during the last 100 days, there's some stories or witnesses where German machine gun crews were destroyed and they were chained to their weapons. So they understood the importance of suppressing the advancing troops. And there's a case in the Vimy where 2 machine guns, German machine guns, held off like an entire battalion. And this has some importance because this is related to how Sifton earned his Victoria Cross. So in 1915, a battalion would have 2 of these unwieldy, inefficient machine guns. Obviously, we need more, so we bring out the Lewis gun. So there's a Lewis gun, smaller, more mobile, can be carried by 1 man. It's got what's called a bipod, which makes it easier to deploy and function. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a machine gun does, instead of 1 bullet being fired every time you press the trigger, this would fire roughly 300 to 400 rounds a minute, or bullets a minute. So the idea was to put that technology in the hands of the soldiers so that they could utilize them effectively to overcome the objectives. So when I first saw this document, I was actually quite fascinated by it. This is a formation document. This is actually the idea that we're going to tell you you're sitting in chairs. There's 3 on this side, there's 3 on this side, and there's even rows. But somebody put that together. Someone organized that as an efficient way to seat you. It makes a lot of sense. Well, At the sum, they wanted a soldier to be standing 1.5 yards between each soldier. That's a nice target. Lots of people standing in a row like that in full view of a German machine gun are not going to last for very long. So what they decided to do is create this formation, and I have a better representation of it, but I kind of laugh because it's 2026. Some poor guy with a typewriter had to type this out properly. So you can imagine how much time it took for them to make a pictorial representation on a typewriter, as an example. So this basically shows the spacing of the soldiers. So a battalion would have a frontage of approximately 360 yards across, so 2-3 football fields. And then they had basically an attacking deck. So a group of people that would take the first objective, then the next people would go over top of them and take the next objective. But what's interesting is there are a component which was specialized, the 20th Battalion had the role of what was called a mopper up. So once they took the objective, they would move on, and it was the 20th Battalion's job to step into those trenches that had been taken and either capture or kill the German soldiers. Luckily, a lot of them decided to become prisoners of war. So there's a document called SS-144, the normal formation for the attack, which was developed in February 1917. And there is an actual pictorial representation of how the first and second waves would be. So they have a key with who are the platoon commanders, who are riflemen, who are Lewis gunners, who are bombers, who's a rifle bomber, and who's a mopper up. So all the triangles are mopper up. So you guys are in the third row, your moppers up. The people in the second row, you're the second line, and the people here are, well, there's not a lot of you in the first line, you are the first wave, and then there would be a successive wave after. So from their experiences in the Somme and earlier battles, they had to change the way that they were going to engage the enemy. They were going to succeed and win and dominate on the battlefield. And I think this is, this is representative of the effort that they took in a formalized method. So, in preparation, they did a full rehearsal. The entire brigade went out of the line, prepared themselves, and they would have, I imagine, because they don't specifically outline, they would have taped off areas with signs indicating objectives. And each soldier, each officer would have practiced and rehearsed in order to be successful. Whether they say, like perfect practice makes a perfect outcome. So these soldiers were given the tools by which they could succeed. They were, instead of having just the officers aware of the battle plan, the soldiers, the sergeants, the lance corporals, the corporals, were given maps, and they were given the opportunity to give feedback on how they were going to fight the battle. So the war diary of the 18th Battalion says a complete rehearsal of the contemplated attack was carried out by the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade over the taped area representing the German frontage, fighting equipment worn by all ranks, reorganization and consolidation practice when objective reached, 15 other ranks attached to the 4th Canadian Trench Battery as carrying party for the offensive. So if somebody didn't have, I didn't include it, there's a picture of the entire battlefield that's been laid out in a diagram for the officers to review and the soldiers to review. Sort of like if they're familiar with a map table, as an example. So there they outline what's going to happen in the first wave, then the moppers up, the second wave with details of what the basic objectives are, the third wave, and then the fourth wave. So even the 94, or very close to the 94, they were sending out soldiers on reconnaissance. So these two officers on the night of the 6th and the 7th went out to the jumping off trenches and wired. And they took a look at the area and they wanted to understand if there had been any changes or was their intelligence as accurate as possible. And yet after they had completed this successfully, and I'm going to assume some confidence, These men have been involved in the battalion for a little while. The scouting officer, Eastwood, and the battalion commander went out and did their own reconnaissance. So I get an impression from when I read the war diaries of these units that they started on the war and they were pretty raw. They weren't good at what they did. They were eager and they were willing to learn, but they needed experience and they needed formal training. And by the time they cut to Vimy, they're basically ready. They're going to do a good job. They have the motivation, they have the training, they have the backing of their government, they have the backing of the military that they can succeed, and they're highly motivated to do this. So, have you guys seen the movie 1917? Okay, pretty cool. I mean, it's even the first aid kits were accurate. Okay, so the level of detail in that film is very good. And I wanted to give the people who aren't familiar with what a soldier looked like at that time. So there's a picture roughly of what a Canadian soldier would look like. He's a corporal. Oops, sorry. Technical problems. Apparently I don't know how to use PowerPoint. He's got his, that's called a small box respirator. It was a gas mask. It was a punishable offense if they weren't wearing them. A bandolier for his ammunition, and you get this Lee Enfield rifle. Putties, very fashion statement there. And then you can see that they had to carry 170 rounds of ammunition. And the grenadiers and we had to carry 50 because their job was to lob grenades at the enemy. Outlining the tools that they required, like sandbags and the picks, so that they could prepare defensive positions. The food, wire cutters are outlined in inventory fully and with great detail. They're going to be well prepared for this battle. I showed this to my friend that served in the RCR, and he gave me a comparison that was really quite a bit interesting. He didn't think 170 rounds was enough ammunition. He wasn't using the bolt action rifle. And he was using a different weapon system with different caliber ammunition, but he thought it was really interesting that it was only 170 rounds. This is what a Lewis gun crew would look like. They're typically 6 to 7 men in a crew. Most of the other men other than the commander and the gunner would carry ammunition. You can see the panniers here, and there are actually 2 panniers behind them, so they were all carrying 4 panniers of ammunition. There would be 1 member that was responsible for the maintenance of the gun, and if there was what was called a stoppage, the gun stopped working, he would try to get it working. He was probably the most important man in that crew because he want that gun to work. But this is actually what they look like. I really love this picture. I mean, I believe he's coming out of the line. His weapon is a mess. He's having a cigarette, a well-deserved cigarette, and he's just absolutely covered in mud. And he's hopefully going back to get a bath and new underwear and socks. So on the day of the battle, it was misty. There was problems with being able to observe the battlefield. And you can imagine today when we have telephones and we can text each other instantaneously, these poor people, they basically had a piece of paper and a runner. And that person would take a piece of paper from an officer, give a piece of paper to the runner, and that runner would go back to the headquarters and hopefully not get lost or get killed. So I just wanted to take an opportunity. These are the instructions of the assault, which I'm going to read. At 0 hour, all assaulting troops will leave their trenches and advance over the top of the ground to their objective. Only battalion headquarters staff, signalers, runners, and wounded will be allowed to use the trenches and bridges over the trenches. And guideposts will be fixed to enable troops in the rear to move forward. They must be thoroughly impressed upon all ranks of the assaulting infantry that success and safety lie in the leading waves, following the barrage as close as possible until their objective is gained. The pace of the barrage has been calculated at 100 yards in 3 minutes, plus certain pauses. And then there's a typo error, view, I believe it's supposed to say view barrage map. barrage map to be issued shortly. So they're going to issue barrage maps, but you're not allowed to go inside. You're not allowed to protect yourself inside the trenches. You have to go over the top in full view of the Germans and their machine guns and their rifles and their trench mortars and their grenades and their artillery. The document on the right side is basically a bulletin reorganization, the assault consolidation. So once we take a trench, we need to consolidate it and we need to collect our ammunition and our troops. We need to start preparing a position in case there's a counterattack. Communication in trenches and special instructions for the assaulting troops. I always love the code names. They use code names for each of the specific units, and they have this theme about seed. I kind of laugh. The core 19th Battalion and 21st Battalion are called carrot and cabbage. I don't know if that was a joke, but they just picked the letter C as a way to identify who the battalions were, but if the message was intercepted, the Germans wouldn't know what carbon was or what cabbage was. And here's an example of a message. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. It's a ruled piece of paper. This is really high tech. It doesn't need batteries. And it says, have reached black objective, 6:05 a.m. Parsons, D.A. Parsons, A Company, 18th Battalion. That's in his hand. That ended up in a runner's hand and went back to the 4th Infantry Brigade headquarters, and later on was included in the documentation of the 18th Battalion. Parsons earned a military cross that day. It doesn't really give very much detail, but he earned the military cross. Well, what I really found interesting is when I was doing research on this presentation, is the 19th Battalion, and I don't know if this is a local innovation or not, but they created a form letter. This is great. You don't have to write it down. You just have to cross stuff off. What I find particularly interesting is here we were held up by, and they've crossed out wire, machine guns, and rifle fire. So in effect, they let no, these three things were an issue, and yet they still say they met strong resistance. So it's a little confusing, but it's interesting to note that those weren't considered the issue of the resistance. So I'm not sure what he's exactly trying to share. And this is another message from another officer, and it's very similar. Now, at the time of this message, they had taken 60 prisoners, 1 machine gun and 1 trench mortar. They believe that the prisoners belonged to several regiments. They had 50 casualties. They weren't held up by anything, but they estimate that the enemy made a strong resistance. So that gives you an idea, as close as we can, that approximately 30 minutes after 0 hour, we had achieved our objectives, and that had basically created battlefield dominance in that area. So the next section, and I hope it imparts information for you of value. This is a little bit, from my perspective, a little bit of a risk. But the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade actually created a message log with timestamps attached to it. So this is about the closest you're going to be to talking about somebody and saying, where were you at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning on March 9th? And here you can see that at 3:55, the 18th Battalion reported that all companies were in position to attack. And at 4:58, the 2nd Canadian Division was advised that the brigade is in position and ready to assemble. So they are ready to fight. They are organized. You know, it's a hard thing to get kids to get in the car to go to Disney World. These people are getting 1,000 men times 4 into the proper locations in time. You know, that is, to me, from my experience with the work I've done, is quite remarkable. So this is the log, basically from 5:15 to 5:55, and I've bolded the areas of interest for me at 5:30, 0 hour. The artillery opened up simultaneously in our troops, 18th and the attack supported by the 20th, advance against the first objective, which was gained 3 minutes after 0 hour. Pretty good. Very impressive. The barrage lifted at 5:33 from the support trenches at 5:38. So there's a little bit of an issue with the time when it was entered and captured by our men at 5:45. The divisional liaison officer reported enemy retaliation was very weak and the light was very poor for observation. So they can look up over the trenches, but because of the mist, the dust, or the fog, they're having trouble seeing what's actually happening. So they need those message chips, those runners giving that information in a timely manner is very important to them as well. So what's also indicative is the message flow, right? The number of texts you receive. If you ever had a day where you're getting lots of texts and you're like, I can't handle this information. So before the attack, there's like 4 messages, and now the attack is proceeding, and it's now 6 o'clock in the morning, and we have a lot more entries coming in. There's a lot more information that the 4th Infantry Brigade is learning about. So at 6:06, signals, report communications complete with the 19th Battalion Advanced Reporting Center. So this is an example of the logistics and preparations that the Canadian Corps did. Is they specifically outlined specific trenches, and they have the coordinates of the trenches, where the reporting centers would be located for the battalion so that they would be fixed in place and the runners would know where to go to get the information. So each of the officers would know where the reporting center was located as well. So that was another way to overcome some of the confusion that battle can create and does create. What's that famous adage is the battle plans disappear the moment the battle starts. So this is their attempt to control that space. They know that things are going to change. They want to be able to respond and react. But they've been so effective in their preparation that they don't have to necessarily do that, which is good. At 6:38, the 5th Canadian Infantry Brigade report that their right battalion is in the black objective, and now they've received word that they're from their left battalion. Visibility is becoming very poor owing to mist. Very few wounded are coming back, and the German barrage is very light. So it is a little bit confusing, and I'll speak to the German response from the artillery standpoint. The general gist from reading this is it wasn't very effective, and that would make sense. If only they have 50% of their guns able to respond, they're not going to be able to put up any counter battery fire or any fire to prevent this attack from happening. But there are cases where I believe they were able to create concentrated fire and cause problems for our soldiers. So this is from 7 to 7:55, roughly the next hour. So 7 o'clock, 4 tanks, about 400 yards to the left of the 19th Battalion are advancing and going strong. 21st Battalion are reported to be advancing slowly and in good order to the red objective. So the 18th and 19th Battalion have achieved their objectives. The 21st has passed through them, and they're now taking the next objective, which is the red line. A runner from the 3rd Brigade, who was lost, brings a message to Brigade Headquarters, which reports black objective gained by 3rd Brigade. So, even with their organization, this runner ended up in the wrong headquarters, which I'm sure was pretty embarrassing for him. Then at 7:35, German artillery firing almost nil. 19th Battalion report consolidation of black objective getting on very well, and started consolidating at 7 o'clock. And then at 7:57, observers in Philip Crater have taken cover owing to heavy shell fire. I think that's an indication the Germans were aware that that was an area for artillery observation, and of course, if they were able to destroy the observers, then the artillery fire supporting the Canadians would be affected. As an example. So from 8:10 to 8:50, That's something I find kind of interesting is some of the officers are reported, in this case we have Major Gwynn who was reported killed, and then the battalion commander of the 21st Battalion is actually reported wounded, but Major Keslick of the 20th Battalion reports that the 21st Battalion is in the red objective. So the other battalions were watching what was happening and giving positive or negative information back to the headquarters. And then from 9:05 to 10:25, we show Major Thompson being killed, but at 9:05, 2 tanks are stuck in the mud, stone there, in the mud at Philip Crater. The tanks ended up being not of any real value to the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade. Sadly. And they kept trying to find methods and ground in which the tanks would be of some value. It wasn't really until later in the war that they came to be a more important component of the battle that were fought. At 9:35, the 6th Canadian Infantry Brigade has reported advance from the red objective, so they're moving on to the next objective beyond that. And then we have an indication of the number of casualties. So they're not defining wounded or killed in action, but the 19th Battalion, 1 company, so company is 220 men roughly, 50 casualties, B company 60, C company 75. So that gives an idea of the cost at which this victory was being, by which this victory was being achieved. So this is a trench map. It's basically the one that we saw previously. The green marker is the Philip group of craters, and that's where the tank got stuck. It didn't even make it to the front line. So it was of no value from a tactical perspective at all. And you can see these red, I keep forgetting I got the laser pointer here. These red circles, those are all craters. And there are some still existing today, such as 𝗂𝗎 crater and Litchfield crater. Litchfield crater is another burial spot with Canadian soldiers interred there. So from 11 to 1 o'clock, artillery reports 2 companies of infantry have passed through T𝗏𝗺. So those are the artillery observers are seeing that. But 3,000 prisoners are reported in the court cage, and 200 more are being sent back. How many soldiers are in a battalion? 1,000. How many battalions were prisoners? 3 battalions. Pretty effective measurement of, again, the effectiveness of the battle. I believe they called it the shelling. The shelling that was prior to the battle occurring was called the week of misery by the Germans. It was that powerful. There was over 1.6 million shells fired in that time, both by Canadian and British artillery units. At 11:20, 4 German prisoners carrying 2 of their captured machine guns arrived at the brigade headquarters. I think that was often an act of submission, is we'll take our equipment back to you, and it was important to collect these trophies. And then they indicated 11:45 that the reorganization of the 19th Battalion is almost complete. That is an important statement. Effectively, what they have just said is we're ready to fight again. We've maybe replaced our losses, but our equipment and then our position and prepared if there's a counterattack or if you order us to move off to another objective. And then at 1 o'clock, the 2nd Canadian Division advised to the amount of captured war material. And then from 2:15 to 10:30 p.m., as it covers a fairly long time frame, the artillery observers report that the ground objective has been captured. So all the objectives that were intended to be captured in that sector have been met. Setfer 21st Battalion reports the capture of 1 German field gun with 15 rounds of ammunition. I'm not sure if this was the case in this particular battle, but there are instances where apparently the Canadian soldiers turned the artillery piece around and decided to send some rounds back to the enemy. We're going to give you your shells back, but And then if you want them, you can have them, but in this way. They indicate there's a message that the 2nd Canadian Division at 4:30 says that the situation is now quiet. There's practically no hostile shelling in the 4th Brigade area. And at 5:30 a.m., the 4th Brigade, in conjunction with their troops, captured its objective and are now holding and consolidating the captured line. Wind strong westerly gas alert on. So they are worried that there may be retribution from the Germans or using gas as an example. So each of those timestamps are a specific moment in time outlining something that has happened, a reaction or a response to the battle in which our troops were involved. So they have an interest in indicating that they've captured trophies. In this case, there was none that I could find with the 18th Battalion of Virginia, but the 19th and the 21st both captured 5 machine guns. You can see trench mortars and light trench mortars, and then a field gun. The 18th Battalion actually captured howitzer, which is actually, if you get a chance to go to the 𝗓𝗄 War Museum, it's actually there. It's massive, it's 20 tons. There's no record in the 18th Battalion War Diary that captured that gun, and I cannot find what action or what location it is. But it's a pretty impressive. It actually was originally at Dunbar Castle and then was moved to Ottawa. And it was actually like a gate guarding at the original museum, and then it's now stored indoors. So this is a previously unknown photograph from Iowa Castle. It's actually a composite. So those shell bursts are not, this is fake news. No, it literally is. Those shell blasts are not part of the original photograph. So someone was enhancing that, and that wasn't uncommon, okay? It did happen. But what's important, or what I think matters, is does anybody recognize what soldier, what army this guy belongs to? German. 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 They're all heading that way. They're being captured, and these soldiers are walking past them without a care in the world. There doesn't appear to be any guard to them. They've been probably instructed to head to the rear, and they're being guided. There were battle police. The battle police's job was to police the battle space to make sure there were no deserters, and that when there were prisoners and wounded, they were being allocated maybe specific lanes of egress out of that. But you can see that the soldiers are walking out over the ground. There's evidence of a bridge or a dugout there, and there's actually here you can see the tape. So there would have been men running tape out to indicate the lanes of advance. So they didn't want any question. You could get in that type of space. There's no landmarks. So the tape helps you understand. It's like the white lines on the road at night that you can see with your headlights. You know, simple solutions for a very difficult problem. The total casualties for the 4th CIB. So I love graphs. I like to make a differentiation. Where I get from this, from the killed, wounded, and missing, is the 21st Battalion had a harder road to hoe than the rest of the battalions. They suffered more casualties because they had to go further along to the objectives past the black line. The 20th Battalion, as the moppers up, were relatively light-grade casualties. The 19th Battalion, for whatever reason on their side, suffered more casualties than the 18th Battalion, as an example. This is from the War Diary, the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade War Diary. It actually has the documentation and accounting of the casualties and the breakdown of the killed, wounded, and missing. So, I noticed that. So the percentage wounded and killed. So this is a little bit awkward thing that I talk about, but in my experience after Vimy, the typical ratio of men killed to men wounded was like 1 man killed for every 3 to 4 men wounded. And no death, no wounded, it would be acceptable. But it is an expected outcome of a battle. Whereas the ratio of dead to wounded in the sum was something like 2 to 1. So like 2 soldiers killed for every soldier that was wounded, as an example. So the overall killed was 26%, and 74% of the casualties were wounded, with 33% missing at the time that data was taken. So obviously the missing would have adjusted. And this is, somebody will recognize this grave, Lance Sergeant Sitton. It's being attended to. I would have loved to know who those soldiers were. I don't think we'll ever know. But through my Facebook group, I was able to meet in quotations, the great-grandson of Lieutenant Eastwood. He earned the Military Cross, and I believe that he actually may have been one of the officers that may have witnessed the events around the Victoria Cross of Sitton. And he wrote in a letter, "Well, Jack, it was pretty hard to tell you anything about Vinny in the letter. It certainly was a wonderful sight. The morning of the 9th was rainy and dull. And when the guns opened up, it all seemed to cut loose. Of course, the Boche had been pretty well bombarded the 3 or 4 days previous. In most cases, the Boche shoved up his hands. But as it is an old trick of his, our men shot quite a few of them." So they were worried about ruses. They were worried about false surrenders. They're worried about soldiers having their hands up and someone staying behind with a pistol or a grenade or something like that. And there's actually a section of training where they talk about ruses and how to deal with them. And I'm pretty sure they were absolutely harsh with dealing with suspected ruses. Now, 3 or 4 machine guns held up for quite a while. One of our sergeants cleaned up on 3 crews, bayoneting nearly every man on his gun. He was killed with cleaning up on the 3 crew. And I think against the 3rd crew, he was given the VC, the only one in our division. And that was the first, I've been doing this for 20 years. And that was the first, outside of official communication, mention of Sitton that I've ever read. So it's quite significant. I have a sense that Eastwood probably had been a little bit more involved in that, witnessing that, but I have no way of proving that. And but he does make mention of it in his letter. So the battle ends, and I wanted to give you a perspective of the relative cost of each of the actions. These are the total KIA, or killed in action, of each month of the war for the 18th Battalion. So that's the 1st Courcelette, with approximately 110 men killed on that day in 1 day. That's been, that's an improvement. That's certainly an improvement. I mean, from a soldier standpoint, if you're looking at those figures and being aware of it, and not a lot of the soldiers were with the battalion the entire time, but that would be a good news story. I mean, it's a bit dark, it's a bit macabre, but if you felt that there was a greater chance that you were going to survive the war, I think that could be a strong motivator, certainly. But then, even with all their training, all the technology, the use of tanks and machine guns, the beginning of the 100 days in August 1918 is the worst month for the 18th Battalion. I have not done a deep dive in this, but with what I know and what I've read, what basically happened is our troops were advancing so fast they got outside of the range of our artillery. And without the support of our artillery suppressing German machine gun positions, they were going to be victimized by the Germans, particularly with machine gun fire. So, I mean, it would be a question of pulling all the data about the way that these soldiers were killed in action and trying to make a determination. But that's the only explanation that I can think of at this time. So, the outcomes and the costs. I think Canadians should be duly proud of the achievements of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. I think that there's, everybody holds a personal valuation that for me makes an impact, to make me feel proud. I can remember driving up to the memorial, and it's fan so starkly beautiful in the French sky, and thinking that that representation of all those soldiers, and not just the efforts of Vimy, but also the efforts of all those soldiers through the entire war, that it was an appropriate response by our government to build such a beautiful monument. But specifically regarding the 4th Canadian Infantry Battalion, as you can see, they obtained their objectives, the number of prisoners they captured, their war trophies, the overall momentum of the attack, the absolute dominance of the attack. If you compare it to the experiences that Fleur, of course, led, there was a lot of confusion and there was a lot of doubt in that battle from what I can surmise from what I've researched. There was no German counterattack on the first day. And as I mentioned, there's diminished German infantry activity. I mean, they took a whooping and they took a while to recover from that. And there was actually a lack of aggressive German artillery, as an example. So I think that success that was achieved by the 4th CIB is representative of the amount of effort that the Canadian Corps took, the officers and the men of the Canadian Corps. We need to remember that a significant amount of planning and achievement of that was also the British Army as well too. We didn't have a lot of strong experience with staff work, and they did. So a lot of the staff work was effort between the Canadians and the British forces, particularly the male officers. So basically, in the end, it's a singular historical focal point for Canada. I mean, we are honoring today the 14th talk that you've had about this. I don't know how many of you have been to all 14 talks, and I'm sure if you had, it would be a very interesting perspective. I think it's important that it helps us understand the strategic context of the battle, which I did not really get into at this time. But certainly from a tactical standpoint, you can see that they set up the tools through pamphlets and other methods to change and adapt their forces so that they could become effective with the environment in which they were fighting in. There also was a societal aspect of this. I mean, we talk it as Vimy as a nation-building battle. We focus on it, and there are 25,000 people went to the 100th anniversary. That's a lot of Canadians in one spot. We can't get that many people to go to a hockey game. Because they're too small. They don't hold 25,000 people. Politically, it had its impacts. I'm not going to get into that in any specific way, and economically. But I think overall that I made a strong case that the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade was representative of the quality of our military effort at that time, which we should be rightly proud of. With that concludes my talk. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. My cousin can attest to I talk a lot. I don't talk a lot without interruption. How can I help you, sir?
On your last time stamp of the Vimy Ridge battle, I noticed it said observation of golden spray. Was that gas?
So that you had to ask one of the questions I can't answer. No, that's a really good observation. So, so just to expand upon the question, so what he's asking is in the distance, and they would have seen like almost like golden sparkles in the air. So what would happen is, and I'm going to use the Canadian example first, is the soldiers carried a pistol that fired flares. If they fired red flares, as an example, that they were under extreme hardship and they would ask for artillery support using the flares. The gold sparkles has been mentioned in the 18th Battalion War Diary in the past. I don't know what it specifically indicates, but it may have been some sort of signaling method, and it meant something to the Germans at the time. But I don't have, in my experience, any specific answer for you on that. But this is a good question. You can imagine what it was like at night, like that one picture that showed the time lapse in the darkness, and then it being interspersed with the flash of shells and flares going up to illuminate the dead ground to see if there was anybody trying to infiltrate in no man's land. And then these gold sprays, which may actually indicate that there was going to be an artillery barrage, as an example, because they did not have, there was some use of radio communication, and they did use telephone and a system called buzzer, but they didn't really have very good methods of, reliable methods of communication. So using signaling was something that they did. Yes, sir, and then maybe sir.
I think one thing that maybe, like Arthur Curry was very pivotal in the battle as well, because he was the one when you said the societal changes. He's the one that said it'll be a staff sergeant to the lance corporal to the private, all the way down. Everybody knows the battle plan. Because of Arthur Curry in that respect, Canada was very successful, whereas the British were still very societal that you do not need to know, right? So.
Yes, I think there was an opportunity, like the Australian, New Zealand, and Canadian and South African units had a lot stronger democratization. That social strata wasn't quite as strong, it wasn't as ingrained as it was. I've been to England twice and I've actually witnessed it. It is a weird feeling. My uncle was in the 8th Army, and we were at the Royal Air Force 10-year museum, and there was a gentleman who had fought with the RAF in the Second World War, and he was a pilot, so he was an officer. And I very proudly said, "Oh, my uncle fought in World War II. He was in the infantry." And the look he gave me and my uncle was shameful. It was like, really, it rounded. And that's a bit of an impression, not necessarily fair, but yes, that social stratification would have had an impact. And I think the Canadians were able, because of the way that we fought and the way that we valued the input of the soldiers, that it was part of the reason for our success, yes. And you had a question or a comment, sir?
Roughly, what was the distance from, let's say, the Canadian start line to where they actually figured they'd beat the Germans?
So to the black objective, the very first line was anywhere between 30 to 100 yards, roughly, yes. It varies. What's interesting is any of the, like I have transcribed the entire 18th Battalion war diary. So that's September 1915 to March 1919. There's very little mention of distances in regards to the spacing of the lines between the Germans and the Canadians. At the time, there is some mention of it. In some cases, apparently, it was as close as 10 to 20 yards, as an example. But that map, if we brought that map up, I was able to put a scale, I could measure it out for you specifically. I have to admit, trench maps are a real challenge for me. My brain tends to freeze when I try to figure them out. They use a coordinate system, and but they are, each of the squares represent a certain range. So right now we're looking at that map. I'd say it would be probably 75 yards between the churches in the sector of the 18th battalion. Yes, sir.
Do you happen to know the elevation of the ridge?
No. Okay, I had a little bit of, my cousin can attest to this, I had a bit of a, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but I had a bit of an interesting insight. So one of the problems with the battle, from my perspective, is the word ridge. They weren't climbing the ridge. The ridge was on the other side. The ridge is where the monument is and towards Lens. That's the ridge. That's pretty steep. And if you had to achieve that, it would be like climbing a hill. But that, the space that they were fighting in, though, and this is what I thought was interesting, Alfred, that gentleman that was in the Royal Canadian Regiment mentioned, is he took one look at that map. I'm just going to bring this up for you. I've got too many fancy things. So that red area, I'm going to do next. That's a really good question. Whoops. Yeah. there's too many fancy things happening here. So if you look at this map on the right-hand side, the lowest point on this map is at 45 meters, I believe, above sea level, up to 157 meters. So approximately 100 meters or about 330 feet change in elevation. I'm going to use my fingers here. So the Canadian line is roughly along here, and this area, the shading doesn't change that much. So it's relatively high compared to the rest of the area, but it's not. They're not doing this, they're doing this. But what would be more of a barrier for their advancement is the fact that the area had been completely destroyed. With shell holes and mine craters and barbed wire. So I don't want to diminish the fact that they were difficult terrain. My conception was, I'm down here and I'm now trying to fight up here. It was not that way at all. So we were fighting on a ridge, we were just on the better side of the ridge. If the tactical problem had been the other way around, where the Germans were up here and we were down here, we would have avoided that area. I'm not a general, I've never served in the military. I don't ever want to give that, those people who serve, I have more respect for them than I can share with you. But if that was me, I'd be like, we're going to avoid this, we're going to go around and surround. We're not going to attack on the way around. So yes, the topography is kind of interesting because it's got the word ridge. And I literally have known about Vimy Ridge since I was 9 years old and didn't really understand the battle space until I saw that map and said, oh, yeah, it's not as serious as it was from a geographic standpoint. But having said that, Alfred said very specifically he would not have liked to have been involved in a fight in that area. He would want to avoid it. So, yes. Any other questions or comments that I can help you with at all? Or? Oh, it's...
Yeah, I've never been there myself, but I lost my great uncle in the First World War. We're not sure if it was Somme or Vimy, one of the two, because we've got conflicting dates of supposed killing, one in 16 and one in 17, around about the time of Vimy Ridge. You've been there. You've been to the memorial.
Yes.
You probably saw his name on the memorial,
Yes.
Melrose Frederick.
No, it is 4,000 names, I didn't see
Okay,
it. But
gotcha. He is
no,
on the memorial, and it's a little confusing because we're not sure which battle he actually was in. We had another of his brothers was also in the army at the time,
okay.
or whatever branch he was in, and he was gassed, but he was able to come home.
And do you know when he was gassed?
During the First World War, I'm not sure when. Okay, that's all I know. The big story that came out of it, and my dad said that he got this from other people, because he was over in the peacekeeping group that went over in the early 60s.
Yeah.
From right here out of St. Thomas, where he enrolled. He did time in Quebec for his basic training and all that stuff. He was a signalman. So he hardly ever lifted a gun. I mean, in his 3 years in the army, he said he think especially over in Egypt, he did 5 minutes work on to fix something on the radios. But the big story was that, and it came right from the First World War and Second War, the Canadians were crazy. They did not know how to stop. They just kept coming and coming and coming. And it's like, don't they ever eat? Don't they ever sleep? Apparently not. We were just crazy. That's basically the words that was used in all the stories.
So I'm going to break down some comments for you. And I'm going to break down what you've said in a couple of sections. So first, you have my email address. I encourage you to email me with his regimental number. I will look into his service record.
Yeah, I found his regimental number on Google yesterday.
I've done over 4,000 soldiers.
Okay.
If you send me the regimental number, I will do my best to address that for you, and I may be able to help you with that.
Would it be accurately listed in the book in Ottawa?
Well, his death would be, okay, so, I'm gonna answer both questions about that. So if we take a look at the bureaucracy of the Canadian Army, and the British Imperial Forces at that time, they were really good at record keeping. I'm absolutely impressed with the fact that the records were stored in England and also duplicated in Canada, that these dates and the information in which they, so I use the term the soldiers are inventory.
Yeah.
Okay, they are inventory to kill. They are treated, they do not have the rights of Canadian citizens. They have committed to fighting until the war is over. And our, as a national state, our survival depends on the way that we manage these people. So we manage them a little bit like cattle and like animals. So, but that being an asset to the Canadian government, or actually the British government, at that time, they had a very good accounting about the soldiers and where they were, and what they, and where they were. So typically, if a soldier was killed in action, that date is pretty accurate. Okay, and I'll give an example where it isn't. And the location can be somewhat difficult, particularly if they have no known grave. So in the Battle of the Somme, and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but just to argue 150 killed in one day, there was probably 75% that have no known grave. So the day they died was probably, the way they figured it out was they didn't find a body, they had a roll call.
Right.
You know, Johnson, Private 𝗏𝗺𝗁𝗏, no present, but we don't know where he is right now. A week later, we still don't know where he is. 2 weeks later, we don't know where he is. In some cases, their bodies were never found. And there's a statistic about the fact that 50% of British and Canadian soldiers have no known grave. My understanding of that is they are buried, but they are not identified. Okay, it's not like they disappeared. I didn't show it, but there was actually 2 men after the war that went over the battlefields and counted, using the British Army maps, the number of dead in a particular quadrant. In the Somme, there were some quadrants with 387 bodies. You know what dog tags are? So at the beginning of the war, they only had 1 dog tag. So if I was killed in action, they would collect my body, take the information down. They typically took the tag with them. Then they would get a glass jar and write in a piece of paper and tuck it inside my battle boots. Roll me up in a blanket and bury me in place. Okay, then 1919 comes around, they exhume the bodies because the farmers want their fields back. That piece of paper, that glass is broken and is now gone. They take a look at my battalion buttons, they see that I'm with the 18th Battalion, but they have no name. So later on in 1916, I believe it was, we had 2 dog tags. One that you took with you and one that you kept with the body. Problem is I believe they were made of a fibrous paper and they would get dead, or they would get lost and they would get destroyed. So a lot of soldiers, such as your relative, are on that monument because they are probably buried, they're not identified where they're buried. Also too, is a bit of a mystery, is that would be a soldier, for clarity, all those men that are recognized on Vimy Memorial are died in France. Okay, Menengate is in Belgium. So he could have been in the Somme and he could have been in Vimy, depending on what day it is, or it could have been in So if you can send me that information, I can probably find it out for you with a fair degree of accuracy.
Yeah, it's just, it's confusing because we got, like, there's an actual tombstone there, apparently with his name on it too, that says date buried in Vimy Ridge, and then on Google, it was a date during the Somme. So it's like, where did he die, when did he die, type thing.
Yes. I think and then, the gentleman in the back, I answered your question appropriately, or did you need me to expand upon that?
Just an idea.
Well, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments they'd like to share with us at all? No? I've been that good, eh? Thank you very much.
We'll still be around for a bit, you can grab a snack and a coffee, you can certainly ask Eric any other questions you have. Just before we go, this is a pivotal battle, and the First World War is certainly pivotal to Canadian history. You talked about this British identity, which was carried through the papers through that time. in society, the Canadian identity will start to emerge after the war, but more importantly, policy-wise, when the First World War was declared, Canada had no separate foreign policy. The British were at war, we were at war. By the end of the war, because of these sacrifices, we're a separate signature on the peace. And that is a huge step towards our sovereignty. So it's something that we'll keep commemorating in the future. And it's great to have partnership with the museum for this. And I'd also like to thank, because we're going to kind of be going on the road for a few months, the Historical Society. Wanted to thank the museum for everything that you do for us. It's great to great to host us, and we'll be back here in September, back here at meetings. But in the meantime, we'll be next month the 𝗂𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁 Toast. The month after that, the Strawberry Social. Then we're going to have a couple of walking tours this month. I haven't worked out yet. July or August. Steve and I will do one, and I'll do the other. And he called me right during this meeting. He still know I'm in a meeting. But so hopefully we see lots of you out for the 𝗂𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁 Toast. That will be at the St. Peter's Cemetery, just south of Wallacestown. Check your emails for a map or the website for directions. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.